Welcome to the Regeneration Podcast. Michael and I, unlike most times, I think we're just catching up a little bit on family stuff, but I'm in the UP and is married to a Finn, like of the old school with a sauna on the property. And you were saying,
Well, I was saying that interesting that you say that because we had a bunch of ladies staying in the yurt over this weekend. I don't know how many, it was at least six, which is I don't know if they stayed the whole time, but they
what was their
actually
stated reason?
they brought a sauna with
That's
them.
cool. Yeah.
Apparently you can rent a sauna and it was cool. I looked at it. I told Bonnie, I'm gonna make one. It was like an old camper like from the
Okay.
50s or 60s that some guy converted into a sauna. It was so cool.
Are you good at saunaing? Like
Yeah,
it's a
we
thing. Yeah.
we
I
used to
do
do,
it. I do it.
where we used to live when we lived in the Detroit area. There was a place called, curiously enough, Finnish Family Sauna,
Huh.
where we would when the kids were little, especially if, in flu season and cold season. So we'd go there maybe once or twice a season in the winter, and it was right around the corner from my parents' house. So we'd go to see grandma and grandpa afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, we used to big sauna people back in the day.
Yeah. I found when I back many moons ago when I was in campus ministry early, I had a retreat at the Abbey that I've raised so many times, but we couldn't stay there. All the retreat houses were booked, so we stayed in a nearby rectory from one of these kind of older Catholic parishes. And nonetheless, so we couldn't have the monks be our speakers because we weren't staying there. So I got a guy who I knew, and if you ever listen to this, Bill Chichester, he was great. He was just a monastery, not a groupie. He
Okay.
was a local guy. He had 7 kids, but he felt at home there, and he was a layman. And so I asked him to come speak to the college students, and he was talking about prayer. And he was saying how the Psalms, when you repeat them often enough, like, prayer, how does it work for you, Bill Chichester? And he rose to the occasion, but he said
Oh, good for him.
he goes there because the Psalms percolate, all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and, a Psalm, it is on your lips in the poetry. And he said, but he said prayer, the way he sees it, and he's learned it from the monks, and it goes back to saunaing. He goes, just like a
Mhm.
sauna, you got to really relax, relax, relax. It's not just about sweating, right? A lot of people think they sauna when they just sweat for a little bit. But there's this relaxation, and then your whole body, if you've had the experience, just goes chink, and it just starts
Yeah.
purging and purging. And I don't know if most people get there. It's something like teaching your kids how to swim. I had to teach my youngest Aiden that there's actual a thing that can happen. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's like a sweat lodge or not, but it's a distinct
Very similar.
phenomenon. Yeah. Okay.
Have you ever done a sweat lodge before?
No, and our friend Stephen Clark says all you got to do is ask. The indigenous, the natives are very welcome to welcome people.
Yeah, I did one. I was a
Yeah.
guy I
Tell
knew.
me about it. Tell me about
Well, it was when I was a Waldorf teacher, and one of the parents in the class was
it.
really into that whole thing, and he invited me over for a sweat.
So was it of a certain Native American tradition or just a guy who does it?
Probably, but
Okay.
it was like those Native American traditions that get mixed up with the New Age.
Yeah, see, I'd be more comfortable just taking the hospitality of a Native American and feeling like an outsider
But it was cool,
than
and the
to,
guy
yeah.
who did it, I really liked the
No, he
guy.
sounds cool. He sounds
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and he was actually he's at that time you could still go to Canada and hunt for moose if you're an American.
Wow,
And he would do that with a bunch of his pals.
that's cool. When you went to this sweat lodge, were you what kind of ceremony? I'm just curious, did it have? And I'm not trying to tease you at
I
all.
can't remember. It was so long ago. I
Mhm.
know there was something,
Yeah.
but I can't remember what we did. But it was good.
Because
It was
again, it
cool.
could
It was
be
in his
authentic or it
backyard.
could be so cheesy and weird me out.
Yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
overly cheesy. It was,
Yeah.
but it was cool, and it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. Did you ever read like the Robert Bly, The Iron John? I'm very aware of it. I haven't read it. But this Martin Shaw book I've mentioned,
Well, he's a big Robert
he is. He
Fly
is.
guy.
And I would have guessed um there was not a lot of depth there, but it sounds like there was a lot. And Martin
Well, I
Shaw
think
is a,
so.
is a good student. He flips the narrative on his teacher on a famous thing he does with like again, like stages of life.
No,
Yep.
I think Robert Bly, he got famous, and then when you get famous, people make fun of you, right? Or
Okay. I don't know.
they spin a caricature of who you are or what you're doing.
So what was that story? I guess I was not even on the fringes. I was
Well, the
outside of
whole
it.
the whole stereotype of men in the woods banging drums and screaming or whatever,
Okay.
which
What
I'm
were the
sure
pros and
there's
cons
something.
of that? Like what was real, just like the hippie movement, what was real, what became fake?
I don't know. I mean,
Oh,
I
okay.
knew people who were involved with that men's
Yeah,
movement, you know, Martin Shaw, whom I have a lot of
yeah.
respect for. Now, here's a cool story though. So
Do it, do it.
I was probably guessing 24, 25, maybe 26, and Robert Bly came and did a free poetry reading
Cool.
at my friend's organic restaurant
Yeah.
in Ferndale, Michigan. And so I went. It was before he was working on Iron John because actually he had for sale like actually a saddle stapled little booklet pamphlet of basically what became the first chapter of Iron John.
Hmm.
And I, you know, it was a great poetry reading. It was my first real poetry reading. That was very cool because he did it all from memory and he played the bouzouki, you know, like in the tradition of the Greek poets with the lyre, you know, kind of thing.
So he was the real deal. Like he
Oh
had
yeah,
a,
sure was. But
yeah,
the
that's
thing,
really cool. That's cool.
what
Yeah.
impressed me though, besides the reading, which was
I
very
just
cool,
didn't know any of this. Yeah.
is when I met him afterwards and I got him to sign my pamphlet, you know,
Yeah.
and I have it in the house someplace. I have no idea where it is, but he was so generous. And it was like one of the first times in my adult life as a man that I felt like somebody was actually acknowledging me as a man, and it wasn't my dad, right?
Say more, say a lot more about that.
That was very cool. I mean, I really felt met,
Yeah.
if you
But
will.
say, can you unpack that? You're a poet.
I don't know.
What it
Uh,
felt like to be met
well, that
as a man.
I finally felt seen as a grown-up man,
That's cool. That's cool.
right? You
Yeah.
know, but in the community, like he was, you know, he was of my parents' generation, so. And I always liked, and in fact, I talked about this with Martin Shaw before. I really always liked his idea of the male mother, that every man needs a male mother, meaning a man who can birth you into your own manhood. And Bly said for him it was Yeats,
Hmm.
even though Yeats was dead, long since dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he said Yeats, you know, by coming into communion with Yeats in his poetry, he felt it was something that kind of initiated him into manhood.
Yeah.
You know, I like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah. I think it's good. Would you be able to name yours? I see a constellation in mine, you know. I
Ah,
definitely would say, like when people would say, if you read Meditations in the Tarot, I think it's in there somewhere. Well, it's in a lot of different corpuses. But Tom Berg, I believe, would mention like if you, I don't even know if he said it's as a result or only if a certain disposition arised or if whether you accepted some type of challenge or quest. But like
mhm.
teachers would come into your life, and I can if somebody asked me, has that happened in your life? I'd say, there's
I
no
think,
doubt. There's no
yeah,
doubt teachers have come into my life. Father Ed
yeah,
Dillon, Father Gerard. I mean, there's so many.
yeah.
They
Well, I
come
had one.
into
I was,
me. Yeah,
yeah.
they're wild. It's
Uh,
wild.
I was just talking about this. Was it yesterday?
Mhm.
Because we had a get together yesterday for my niece's or Bonnie's niece's birthday,
Yeah, you
and
mentioned.
so everybody's over here, and I can't remember who I was talking to, but um, I was talking about one of my professors in college when I was a student at Marygrove College,
Mhm.
and I was an English major,
I guess I
but
didn't know you went there too.
there were all these courses I wanted to take that they never offered, like courses on Christian existentialism or, you know, studies in Christian creativity or whatever. And they never offered these. And so I went to the guy's office who was the head of the religious studies department in philosophy. His name was George Elser. I'm like, hey, I want to take these courses, but you guys never offer them. He said, I'll give them to you. And so what he did is he just gave me tutorials. And I didn't realize at the time until much later I realized that he went to he did his bachelor's degree and master's at Louvain in Belgium.
Yeah, yeah.
He
Scandalous
was
place now, but it's had an illustrious history.
Oh
Right
yeah.
now, they'd say it's just kind of bastion of that kind of Jim Martin progressivism.
Is
That's
it
part of it.
really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well,
I
yeah.
don't know if that's still true. I know that was maybe a decade ago at
So
least.
he was there, and he was actually on the road to be a priest, but he met a woman he fell in love with, and then decided not to be a priest. But then he went to Oxford to work on a doctorate,
Okay.
which he never finished. But then I realized what he was doing with me is he was giving me an Oxford kind of tutorial. So he'd go, so read The Divine Names by Dionysius and come talk to me next week. So I go next week and we talk to him for about an hour or two.
Mhm.
And they said, okay, great. Now next week read Berjayev. And I'd read Berjayev and I'd come back
Uh,
and I'd talk to him. And it was years later when I was his
sure.
colleague, and we used to teach a course together when I was his colleague at Marygrove on religion and film, which was so much fun. Then I realized what he was doing is he was giving me an Oxford tutorial. He was giving me an Oxford education in the middle of Detroit, Michigan.
Unpack what you mean by Oxford
Well,
education.
he was
That's not even
teaching me the
resonating. Yeah.
tutorial method, which is not the
Yeah. Okay.
lecture method, right?
Right. 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 Okay.
So you're
Yeah.
engaging one-on-one with
Hmm.
the student and the
Yeah.
student's mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just that's how you learn by reading and talking, right? And writing.
I don't know if I ever would have thought of it exactly like that. You're just saying, um, yeah, it's kind of like I'm hearing from you the same metaphor that you said, which really helped me, that like the people who can critical thinking, and I've mentioned this in your praise twice. Critical thinking. You say, yes, those people who can work with their hands. Their body is familiar with looking at things from different angles. This sounds like another version of that, that
Hmm.
in some way, I guess I honestly, I'm saying I didn't have, when you said the Oxford method, I didn't know what you were talking about. I
Yeah.
really didn't know what you're talking
Well,
about.
you see when you read people who went
Yeah.
to Oxford, they go, yes, and I met with my tutor. That's what they were
Yeah.
doing.
Okay.
And by the way, since it's All Souls
Yeah.
Day, here's to George Elser,
Yeah. Say more.
one of my patrons. Do you see Ray?
Hmm. You say right.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's All Souls Day.
Yeah. My
Ah,
friend Philip Aldboni, maybe he'll come on next week. He knew he was free on Sunday. I've got to look at my calendar and I'll talk to you, Michael. But he wrote an interesting Substack, and it's something I didn't know. In fact, I used ChatGPT. But he said he talked about a tradition. He didn't hide the fact that it was somewhat esoteric of a connection between All Souls Day or Halloween, All Hallows Eve, Halloween, and the flood,
hmm,
and All Saints Day with kind of almost early. I'd have to read it again. You could get it. You start to even smell the dove and the olive branch. And he was using that as a metaphor for what, he sees. I was offering him the metaphor of a bubbling cauldron, the stuff we're seeing around us now, things
mhm,
going down, things coming up. But he was just, it seemed to me like, we're moving through almost a vertical version of that where a lot of things are going on. And he feels that way, that we're epical, Age of Aquarius. Again, we're all going to have to register that in our own way.
mhm,
But that's I guess I'd go back to what you're talking about, the tutorial method. That was completely new to me until you mentioned it. That
mhm.
I would say I've had people who did that, but maybe at grad school only. A professor, Richard Henshaw, I he said there is no wrong way to write an exegesis paper. I just went to grad school. I'd never taken a course in theology or scripture study. So he's talking about an exegesis, that for some of our listeners, it's, taking one small, maybe a word of scripture, a line, a paragraph at most, a pericope, and kind of unpacking that, and maybe making its tie in to things that came before and after, exegeting it. But
Mhm.
so I did something, and I forget what it was, but it was, and this is one of my teachers, not Herzog. Yeah, Werner Herzog. So sorry. His name will come. His name will come. The the He showed me how, but he said again. Sorry about getting confused. No wrong way to write it. And then I submitted one, and it used, I don't know, it was on. I brought in some Meister Eckhart and things like that. And his only comment, I got like a C plus, and because it was legible, and I'm a decent writer. And he said, "This is not an exegesis paper." And I just knew. He said, "There's no wrong way to do an exegesis paper," and I knew I was exegeting it. And then he said that, and then I don't know, it got my dander up, and it takes a little bit to do that. But I just went to his office. I just said, like, WTF in a way.
Mhm.
I have no idea unless you instruct me. And then, as you know, where the story ends, like the guy taught me more than any professor heretofore. He got the blood flowing through my veins, and then he gave me the courage the first time. There was a fad going on at grad school where um, it seemed like you could cop out of any meaningful discussion by just saying I'm struck by something. So
Hmm.
you'd be in a class, and this is mostly at Colgate Rochester Divinity School, and there were good people there. But somebody would ask a question or just look for comments, and everybody would say I'm struck. I'm just struck, and there was nothing you could argue with. And I wrote an article. I wrote an article saying like we're stricken by struck, and
Ah,
yeah, and I just named the disease Blue, this guy that I'd start to put on a pedestal. He took me seriously. I got a long letter from him kind of in praise of that article. And the only point I tell that story is, you're having a mystical moment in interactions like that. The Holy Spirit is found in interactions like that. Like
yeah.
a strange knock on a door. Somebody wakens you up to something you hadn't seen. But they were enkindling, in one way, he was enkindling my more impish side, punch back sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. And may God strike me down if I get struck again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where did you develop your impish side, or were you always a fighter?
I was born a smart ass,
Yours
but
is more pronounced than
well,
mine.
because I grew up, um, plus, I mean, in a working class neighborhood,
Yeah,
people get in fights all the time, and I was not big,
yeah,
so I had to be funny. But also, I came from a family of Irish wits. Both my parents had a pretty quick wit, and my mother's family, they were all Irish smartasses. They're
yeah,
all quick with the tongue,
yeah,
quick with the quip. So that's where I got it from. And plus, I I don't know, it's like an occupational hazard with me, if somebody says, you know, this is how it is, I'm like, why? Right? Even when I was a kid, I was like that, and I got into so much trouble in Catholic school because it was why? What's the point?
yeah. I
What?
give you credit. I literally tuned it all out. I was
Mm,
gonna say like fights. I've never been in a fist fight, Michael. Like I just had a pack of friends. We learned how to beat the system. It wasn't really cheating. It was close to it. I don't know, it was a hive mind. It was the 80s. It's kind of
mhm.
captured there in Stranger Things or something. But that's why I say, like, I didn't pick up a book until after I graduated from college, and nobody did me wrong. And there were other people along the way that I just didn't have the ears to hear. So I'm not blaming anybody. But you continue. Yeah,
I mean, I mean,
yeah,
that's just, that was part of my makeup. I was just a nonconformist, I guess.
yeah.
For
Remember when
whatever.
Aaron Weinacht was on? He was really deep. The least pretentious guy. People remember. You can look up the YouTube. A dad lives kind of off the grid, but with zero affectation. He just doesn't like cell phones. He's a professor, but he again with zero affectation he was reading Dostoevsky just out of interest. By the ninth grade at the latest, and already interested in the Russian language. That was very 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 far removed from me. And
Mm.
that's where did you first get turned on to the world of ideas? I'm going to say, or you might frame the question
I
as
was a late bloomer that way. I mean, well, I guess that's not true. I I was interested in music, right?
okay.
And songwriting. And I started playing the guitar when I was 13 and started writing songs right away. And so I was interested in that, that kind of magic, but also that kind of led me to looking for meaning first it was in songs, but then it was in poetry and literature and Rudolf Steiner and whatever, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And the weird thing is, I remember I was about 18 or 19, standing on the corner near my house, and I realized, I said, well, I didn't have an idea in my head that wasn't borrowed or, you know,
Yeah.
taken by osmosis from somebody else. I'm like, that's not good.
Now, how old were you? I know I was at least 21. At least
I was
21.
18 or 19.
Okay. Well, all right. All right.
And I
I
was like,
guess I
well,
wasn't too
that's
far
fucked
behind.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should figure out things. I should figure out a couple of things first.
Yeah.
And that's when I started reading intensely.
Now, without being judgmental, what percentage of the population you would think for themselves? Because it is a phrase we have to use.
Well, it's not
It can be
even,
so pretentious, though, so pretentious. But in the atmosphere created here, uh, how rare do you think it is? Because it is
I think
increasingly rare.
I think it's super rare. I think it's
Yep.
less than 10 and probably less than 5%.
Yeah. And I asked that question because I care about like one thing and one thing only right now. And it's the idea that like what we're dealing with now is an issue of crowds, mostly political crowds. And
Yeah.
Jesus and the community is the opposite of a crowd. In a crowd, there's no freedom. There's a herd mentality. Read Elias Canetti. I just ordered that book like 2 weeks ago. I've used it a lot, read big sections online. But and that salvation in our time is one by one rescuing people from a crowd. Now, lest anybody think I'll go this far, I'm preaching, but lest anybody think that means like winning them to a different worldview, like regeneration or something else. That's more the problem than the solution.
Yeah.
You just, yep. How would you describe that? Why is it more the problem than the
Well,
solution?
I think, well, I think probably if you go back, to the 80s, for instance, the problem wasn't that kids were conditioned by television or anything. They really weren't. Not to the extent that people are conditioned by social media and things like that now, right? So there was, and there seemed to me,
What do you draw? I mean, I mean, this is a tricky thing then. Where did it get bad? Would you say the cell phone? I'm going back to the camera, Mike, and I'm willing to defend it. I don't want to do a whole podcast on it now,
uh-huh.
but most of this began with the camera. So like when I find myself condemning the cell phone, um, I take a step back. And the person who put me onto this was a weird Russian guy, Andrei Navrazov. He used to write for
Hmm.
Chronicles magazine. But he smelled out the camera in a series of essays. So did Kierkegaard. That's my understanding. I haven't read enough Kierkegaard. But
Okay.
the idea of just like living through facsimiles, and it wasn't quite like
Right.
early on, right away. Like you knew an experience, you felt like an experience. There was another voice, an angel on your left-hand side, Sinistra, you know, and we still need to come to terms with that angel, but who is saying your experience is somehow real if you have a picture of it.
Well, I think, yeah, because a lot of people, I used to do an experiment with kids. It's not really an experiment, but an
Well,
investigation with students. And actually, I can do it
like
with that.
some
Let's
weird
do it with our
conspiracy.
audience right now, Mike.
Yeah,
So, and here's the thing, right? So close your eyes
I'm doing it.
and
They're closed.
try to imagine or try to recall what your earliest memory was.
I already know because I've returned there. I
And the
can't
other
get.
thing is,
Yeah.
wait. Then there's what's your earliest memory? About how old are you? And from what vantage point do you see this experience?
Wow, the vantage point I've never thought of, but it's a clear one for me.
So what's the
Mine is
vantage?
quick, so I'll tell people.
Yeah.
I forget the year. I'm guessing four. I'm 4 years old. We had moved briefly down to Pennsylvania. Mom was not happy. She was away from her mom. My dad, good guy, we were talking about him, moves back to Rochester. Happy wife, happy life. Grew up in Penfield, again, the 80s, early. Those became just a gang of people. But my first memory, um, maybe there was a flight of a Blue Angel in Philadelphia.
Okay.
My dad could tell me the Blue Angels flew overhead, and I kind of resonate. But first memory was running up from the woods in Penfield that were from the bottom of our street, Penfield, New York, with my brother and my sister. They were both ahead. They were looking back, and they were telling me a snake or snakes were chasing me. And they were telling me they're catching up with me, and they were running up. So how much of that was real? How much we know it happened? And they did this. But then the vantage point was,
Assholes.
yeah,
That's
and the
right.
vantage point was very much it's it's from me seeing them increase the distance as
Okay.
I was running and just screaming, and they kept on increasing the distance.
Yeah. I've done this with college students and Waldorf students
Yeah.
a lot. And usually when people do it, it's like they're between 3 and 5.
Okay.
Mine, I think I was 2.5. And I only know that because it was around the time my brother was born,
You were in the wake up class for the gifted,
and I'm
the
2.5
developmentally
years older than
advanced.
you.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I remember because we lived at my grandmother's house
Where did she live?
on the east side of Detroit.
Okay.
In fact, if you ever see the movie,
Gross Point Blank.
no, Gran Torino.
Clint Eastwood directed, seen parts of it.
Yes,
I couldn't tell you the whole story.
but the church is actually the church we went to in
Huh.
there. And so I was about 2.5, and it was my brother was born on November 30th. So this is a couple weeks later, right before at Christmas, 3 weeks later. And my parents must have told me you know, don't get up too early because if you get up too early, Santa Claus will take the toys back.
Mhm.
And I got up, and when I walked into the hall, my parents' bedroom was upstairs, and I was on the first floor with my mom and my grandmother and my sister. And I woke up, and my grandmother had put a cardboard Santa outside of my room, and I freaked out. I was like, I see it there! And I ran up the steps to my parents' room, and they were laughing. But I remember, but the thing is, when I look at it, I'm kind of looking at it from above and behind myself, right? I'm looking down on myself.
Okay, yeah.
And when I've done this with people, I would say 80 to 90% of the people I've done it with
Okay, then
are
let me tell
looking
you
down
just
on themselves,
about,
right?
when I was telling you that I saw them increasing the distance, Michael, it seems like one of those things like when you have a dream, how it's two things at the same time. So I'm just letting the audience know. But there was only one other answer, and it was equal to that. And possibly if they watched my eyes before saying it, it was as much, but there was only one other thing in my mind is that it's the vantage point of behind my head, something
Yeah,
watching me run and not
right.
catch up. Right. And I
And
had third person omniscient too, for sure.
my question is, what's with that, right?
Well, you tell me.
I don't know. Uh, Now the funny thing is that the people and I've done this with, who actually their vantage point was actually is from their own head looking out, right?
My kind of first one. Yep.
Those were those tended to be the more concrete thinkers, and almost all of them they were older first memories, like 5.
Hmm.
Which is interesting. Now,
But you're not Michael Martin unless you've come up with some theory about
no,
this,
no,
like a
no.
developmental. Like Rudolf Steiner has something to say
Yeah.
about this.
Well,
Okay.
I think this is I'm gonna bring Rudolf Steiner in.
Okay.
Tag team with Rudolf Steiner. Well, Steiner would say that the reason it's 3 years old is because that's when the ego comes, and most
Okay.
people's memories are around that time, right?
Okay.
First memories,
And people have raised children that can
and
totally
often like yours and mine. It's related to fear or pain.
mhm,
It's
fear.
the ego where the ego finally landed, the self finally landed, right? And this is actually, Steiner says, this is when children start to refer to themselves as I,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing. With the vantage point,
So it's like you're sucked into something that finally says I.
yeah, my
Yeah.
guess with the vantage
I guess
point,
I was seeing the back of my head, then I got
yeah,
sucked into it. Then I woke up
I
inside my
mean,
skull and saw my brother
I
and
know.
sister, who I'll never forgive, running
But when
away
have you
from me
ever
with
seen the back of your head?
snakes
Never. You'll
chasing
never
me.
see the back of my head.
Yeah.
Um, but I would guess, this is guess, that that's actually a spiritual perspective of the self.
Yeah.
So because you were probably still like children, you know, mostly in the spiritual world,
Mhm.
and not as fully in the body until
Right.
after that point, right?
Yeah.
So that's my assumption. But it's interesting that it's almost universal, with the vantage point and the age is with the
But the
age.
other one, I'll bring in the other factor is because I was thinking my daughter Mary Beth was definitely conversing things. She could talk decently, but she's conversing with things. I guess they were fairies out in the backyard, but nobody could convince me that there weren't like entities there.
Mhm.
But we have with the work of like Barry Sanders and Ivan Illich, we have the notion that if you taught somebody the alphabet as a parent early on, that would
Mhm.
force that thing, the alphabetic way of thinking
Mhm.
is coterminous in some sense, right? I mean, so the Russians are the most literate nation on earth, but none of them. So, would think about teaching their kids like a phonetic alphabetical style of thinking,
Mhm.
because that phase before that, maybe that ego consciousness, that's equated with the divine feminine. Ontologically, ontology recapitulates phylogeny. The
Right.
history of Michael Martin is the history of the universe, this type of stuff. So you had that era of poetry, that era of the divine feminine. You have that era of like darkness. You have the era of the Garden of Eden. Then all of a sudden we kind of come to, and it's like Russian dolls. There's levels of that. It seems to me the
Mhm.
more I think about it.
Well, and
But
that's
the alphabet, teaching people the alphabet, I would just think the first thing we would do for education, if somebody said we need a new school system, and of course we do, it's all the things I wouldn't do because I'd have a shorter school year, a shorter school day, and I wouldn't teach reading until they were at least 7 years old.
well,
Or
yeah.
Steiner would say the second declension, right? having to do with the teeth coming in.
Yeah, that and that's an interesting. I mean, that whole thing with the dentition is an interesting thing. But yeah, that's why in Waldorf schools they don't rush into that kind of concrete thinking with
Yeah.
alphabetic literacy and stuff like that, where it starts with imagination and then works its way into the the concrete from the imagination, not the other way around. Um, and I mean the whole thing with the dentition, such an interesting thing.
It's the first thing people think is Rudolf Steiner. For me, it was like I'm reading him and it seems somewhat interesting that I saw that. And it's like a path in the woods for a lot of people, or at least it was for me. It
But
sounded so freaking crazy. But
but
then
it's
all of a
so
sudden you read about it and like everything, and it's the microcosm within the macrocosm of Steiner because it makes so much sense.
and Maria Montessori came to the same conclusion about the
Sure.
change.
Right, right, right.
And interestingly enough, um, I mean, and with Steiner, so the kids, babies get their teeth. When they finally get a whole set, then they start to say I, right? And then at 7, they're 6 or 7, their teeth start to fall out, right? Teaching first grade is crazy because nobody has teeth in the whole room. Um, and then with the change of teeth, then you can start to teach reading. Right? But
That is
then
such a cute stage, though.
then
Oh,
what the next stage is the loss of the 12-year molars, right?
right.
And which is another kind of thinking comes in with that. It's like right before adolescence, right? It's like the astral body is pushing those teeth out to let the new ones come in. And of course, then you go a few more years and you get to the arrival of the wisdom teeth around 18 or 19 years old, which is, those things all kind of gauge the capacity for a new kind of thinking.
Mhm.
That's what they call them, wisdom teeth, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of it's kind of and nobody talks about this. And you mentioned this to most educators. They're going, "What are you talking about?"
Well, let me ask you something again, and I think I've asked you this before, and I always come away because this stuff is so natural to you, but it's going to be about education. So call yourself an educational philosopher. But at this time, so many people are thinking about an alternative to schools. Again, institutions are in full-fledged breakdown right now. Look around you. But so on the issue of uh, teacher training, how much some people could say like there's a shortage of nurses, but they still, even the programs that seem fly by night to get accredited, it seems to me if you watch TV, you're still spending like 15 months kind of intensely learning things, at
Right.
least for an RN. I don't know. But so for teacher training, kind of Waldorf, there's insights and then there's a method, but like we're also living in extraordinary times.
Right.
Say something. Like you're
Well,
raising kids right now. You live in upstate New York or Western or Southern Michigan where there's Amish around. We live in the same type of area. Um, what would you do if you had somebody gave you a couple $100,000? Or you again, ideally Jesus hands on a
I'd
way of
retire.
education that's
Right.
free. Right. Yeah, go.
Well, I think what it all boils down to, and I know this because I taught in education departments part time. They would pull me into teaching because I had been a school teacher. They would pull me into
Yeah.
teaching courses, which was crazy. Um, what none of them have that Rudolf Steiner has is a rational anthropology. And the reason Steiner's education works so well is because his anthropology is so solid. Whereas, we saw over the last half a generation, with the rise of the activist teachers with pride flags in their classrooms, right? They have a bullshit anthropology. Their anthropology says gender doesn't matter or doesn't exist, right? That is a bullshit anthropology. Steiner has a very solid anthropology, and even though people get scared when you start to talk about the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the ego, and they go, "Oh man, that sounds spooky." That is actually a very um, medieval and early modern Catholic
It's
uh,
that, yeah, it's just
metaphysical
common
policy.
sense.
Well,
That's
it
why,
is.
like, yeah, because you can
It's
raise levels of perception, but you just have
it's
to tell
Thomistic.
people, yeah. And then
Yeah,
we just have a fallen level of perception right now. We have a hypertrophied left brain and a fallen right brain. I think most people can vibe with that. Yeah.
yeah, but that until I think unless you have a solid anthropology grounded in reality, you're not going to have a solid education system. you're just going to have bullshit, you know? And unfortunately, even Waldorf has been contaminated by wokeism uh, in the current climate, unfortunately. But that's, I mean, I don't think you can, I mean, really can't have a solid understanding. In fact, that's what one of the primary texts when Rudolf Steiner gave when he's giving 2 weeks of lectures to the first teachers of his first school in Stuttgart. One of the books that collects some of the lectures in that is called Study of Man, right? So you have to know what a human being is and like we were talking about dentition and all this other
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
And when is it appropriate for abstract thought and when is it not? And what happens if you do lead a child into abstract thought? Well, you know what he says? He said you give kids abstract thinking too early, like Illich would say with ABC, right?
Mhm.
Is that you actually create the conditions for sickness for children with rickets or other kinds. And you could say ADHD, you could say all kinds of other things, right?
Right, right, right.
You're making them sick because you're overcharging the nervous system, because you're filling it with stuff, abstractions that the child can't hang with, and that the astral body hasn't come in or the etheric body hasn't been strengthened to kind of buffer the onslaught of that. And so you have a weakened etheric body. And because you have a weakened etheric body, when the astral body comes in, it hits the kid like a ton of bricks. And then that's when they start, and this is really what's happening. This is when they start, well, maybe I was born in the wrong body. Okay. And they're like, okay, what do you mean by I? And what do you mean by body? So who's got the right body? Well, how did you get the wrong body? Should we go back to the store and see, did they give you the wrong size? How are you going to do this? And that's what I mean. That's a we're surrounded by bullshit anthropology.
I know, but what's the non-bullshit response? So I totally agree with you. But but you also make room in the way you describe the history of it for that's the only world so many people know, you know?
I know.
Yeah.
And the thing
Um,
is, well, if you talk sense to somebody
but
who's crazy,
but
they
is
think
it
you're
is
crazy.
it does it get down to like facts and feelings, or is it a return to kind of a what metaphors do we use to get the message out? Otherwise, just speaking for yours truly, it sounds like it plays according to the culture wars, and we know how easily the issues of the culture wars get massaged by the powerful, right? That's what I've been thinking about it so much because our friend Guido's got this beef, that Bishop Barron referred to recently, the Regensburg Address, and it just showed as the Vatican. It doesn't mean Guido's right, but he can't let this down, and I happen to agree with him. Okay, well, fine, fine, fine. There's these things called there's no such thing as gender, and there's these ideas out there. But let's talk about the real thing, how that was created. That is a viable belief. And cui bono, who profits? How do the powerful use this? But how do we really get out of this? Because they love the culture wars. They love them. How do we get out of this? And I think it's got to be in the register of um, good mythos, story,
Yeah,
and
but
community, or you're very good at diagnosing it. I'm not saying there's a weakness another place, but what do you think is like an educator? Where do we go? Do we just start building? I kind of think we need to start just building institutions and people would come to them. But I just can't believe we can blame people from not waking up because they're totally submerged.
well, yeah.
It's like if
Um,
somebody's holding somebody underwater, we don't blame the victim being held underwater.
well, it's
And
like
it's nearly that powerful.
well, I think the situation is described by Plato in the Republic with the cave, right?
Mhm.
The thing is, the one person finally starts to see, wait a minute, that's not reality. Those are shadows.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna go see where that's coming from. And one of the things that people forget about when they talk about the allegory of the cave is one of the dangers is you come back and tell them what the truth is, and they kill you.
Right.
Yeah, and I think um, so. The best you can possibly do is not not buy into the bullshit and then just tell them what the truth is, right? And they might look at you like you have two heads. and you might die, and then they find out 100 years later, you know what, that guy was onto something there. But I
Fair
don't
enough.
think you can't convince people, right? You can't I mean, of anything. I mean, it's just crazy I mean, you probably saw this happening over social media over the last few days, where they're trying to blow up that what's her name? Erica Kirk gave JD Vance a hug, and they're trying to turn it into that they have a thing going on, and they're just it's relentless, and it's so
Who's trying to say? I didn't know
well,
that
it's
one.
it's people from the left.
They both freak me out a little bit. Okay, yeah.
It's
Again, everything
it's
freaks me out right now.
and then if you well, the thing is, you show somebody a picture out of context and then say, oh, look at that, right? And you're going to
Yeah.
see what they want you to see.
If somebody told me, and I think I heard this, is that like you could take the angle that that's who the power people are using for like the next president and vice presidential thing. I'm color me curious for that, and
But
that's not too far
it's
removed,
all
but that's
propaganda
interesting.
all the time, though. It's no, they're not interested in the truth.
Agreed.
Yeah, they're interested in, like you said, promoting a particular angle.
I know, but on the flip side of those two characters, Vance and Erica Kirk, there's a lot of weirdness that surrounds both of them. So people would, I think it would
Well,
be quite
wait,
natural.
is it any weirder than surrounds anybody else?
No, 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 I'm not so
The only
sure
thing
that
that nobody knows about you and me.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people think I'm weird, believe it or not, Mike.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of weirdness around that guy. Um, but the thing, I mean, I really think you're not going to change the culture. Because no one gives a shit. No one wants
I
to hear.
find myself agreeing with you there,
But
but
the
you
only thing
would
you can
go
do,
ahead. Yeah.
like with Jesus and the apostles, right? I mean, just a bunch of, like there were some guys. There was a handful of people, right? Maybe maybe 50, yeah, whatever, right? And everybody else thought they were crazy. And the same thing, not comparing what I'm talking about to the Christianity, but you know, you just you meet, you people find you, and you find people, and
There's
they go,
nothing I
oh yeah,
strongly
I'm glad you
disagree
said
with
that.
there.
That makes perfect sense to me. I wish I would have heard about this before, right? Which I
I
hear
I
people about
do
this all the
think
time.
that I do think what you say there is true, and I'm just trying to think out loud. But yeah, that your what I hear you saying is that if somebody wrote a pamphlet like Recipe for Dark Times, this is kind of what it looks like. You kind of resolve to yourself to speak your truth. You love the people close to you. You try to do right by God and things like that. And then, yeah,
And don't buy the lie, right?
right, right.
And don't say, well, yeah, that's your truth. Thanks for sharing. You know, because even if we could talk about Rudolf Steiner's anthropology, right?
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a poetic anthropology, right? I mean, you
Sure.
don't want to turn it into dogma or anything, but it gives you a way to think about the relationship to, well, actually, the actual phenomenology of what happens with the growing child and the change of teeth and all this other stuff, and it tracks, right? It makes sense.
It
Now,
really, 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 really does. Yeah, I want
yeah,
people to know
but
that. Yeah.
and and the thing is, if you were to tell somebody, who are trying to get you on there are no genders, or there's no such thing as gender bandwagon.
Mhm.
You can't engage those people. Because I had students who were trying to do this. Well, everybody, one student, she was giving a presentation, and she said, "Well, everybody knows that there's no such thing as gender." I'm like, "Excuse me, what do you mean by everybody?" You know?
Right.
And where did you come up with this idea? And this is just doing, like, that's old school professor stuff. Interrogation of assumptions, right? Where do you get this idea from?
It is, but then now Jordan Peterson took that tack and he's not doing well. And I guess I think
He's
again,
sick.
like
Yeah,
I know, but the culture warrior piece is different from, and I'm not saying I do agree with this, but all I want to make the case is it's wildly,
well,
wildly different from the idea of the way more fundamental reality of how power uses those things and
right.
creates those out of thin air. and that both sides are usually bigger tools unless they consistently kind of come together and bond about how power plays these games. Because right
Yeah.
now you have people questioning the big things,
Right.
big things. And this guy,
Well,
James W. Douglas, just came out with the sequel to JFK and the Unspeakable.
right.
But I'm deep into it, and it makes it irrefutable. The CIA has no problems offing important
Right.
public figures.
Well, my theory with Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
is, I think he probably had a kind of a weak constitution, weak etheric body. Because, and the thing
When I
is,
feel bad for his illness, I just think he wasn't saying anything innovative once he got reduced to being like a Daily Wire guy. It was the most boring
well,
drivel. And yeah,
that's true. But on the other hand,
totally. Mhm.
he was under, before that happened,
Yeah,
he was under such attack for just saying normal thing, practical
totally
stuff.
agree. And that
And
I
I
think you
think,
and I have always been fair to him, where we give
but
him
I
praise
think
where
those
praise is due.
attacks, they take on a spiritual form.
Yeah.
And I think, and the place where you feel things is in the astral body, and I think because his etheric body was probably weakened, not the healthiest constitution in the world, that with all that stuff going on, attacks on his etheric body, and Steiner calls this the pedagogical law, right?
Yeah.
So the pedagogical law is that, so you're going to work with a kid in, say they have a hard time they have a weak etheric body, so they have a
Hmm.
rough relationship to time and rhythm and mathematics. So you don't work from your etheric body on that kid. You work from your astral body, which is, you know, you work from the astral body onto the child's etheric body, which means you take interest in the kid, or introduce humor and emotion and that kind of thing, and then you can start to regulate their etheric body, or
Hmm.
their etheric body will regulate itself, but now you've created the conditions. And the same thing I think would happen with Jordan Peterson is you had these people from out of their egos, right? And all they're almost demonic egos in some way, acting on his astral body, and filling out, and causing concern. And nobody likes to hear hate directed at them 24 hours
No.
a day, right? And I think that because his etheric body was probably weak, or weak, not as strong as it could have been. I mean, he's an intellectual. He doesn't work with his hands. He's not a farmer, right? Doesn't have any relation with animals. I think that because of that weakened rhythm, and plus he was traveling all over the place, that also fucks up your etheric body. And I think because his etheric body was not able to create the kind of buffer between the astral body and the physical body, that it just went straight through the etheric body and hit his physical body. That's why I think he's sick.
But what do you, two things that I think could be related, but I'm just speaking what I think I hear about like the younger generation when they look at Peterson. I think there's two different things. One is he got physically sick. And in one way, I would say these are connected, but they're better
And this is
connected
and
by
this is
saying,
not the
but
only time he's been sick either,
no,
right?
100%. But
Yeah.
tell me how you factor in, or maybe you disagree,
Uh,
that the way he started thinking and talking was he could have just read like the worst political, most boring
Yeah.
rehash. It was just he became a parody of himself. How are those two things connected? Because I
I
think
well, I
we're
think he was exhausted.
more interested in the mental sickness than the physical
Well, I think
sickness.
he was exhausted. That's what I think
Okay.
happened. And
I
okay,
think it was the money. I think it was
I
the money and
well,
fear and
but I
fear.
think the money, but also he didn't. Yeah, but the thing is, fear, meaning not having a livelihood,
Yeah, it's big.
right?
Oops.
Losing your job as a professor, your job that you loved and you
He was
did.
attacked, and yeah, there's no doubt. And again, I think we've covered him fairly over the years that
Yeah,
in those totally courageous,
but I think he was
yeah,
exhausted. And he was like, okay, just give me.
yeah,
I'll take a job, and
yeah.
and I think he didn't have the resources to do that anymore. And I
Even
think the
for me,
danger
oh, go
with
ahead. Yeah.
everybody is to fall into self-parody.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
I
as soon as you
that's
get a
one of my
crowd, yeah,
fears.
yeah,
I'm
with
always
you.
that's why we were talking about earlier how my nonconformist, you know, personality flaw, you know. I mean, one of my big fears, this is why I think I piss off a lot of people, because I don't want people following me or emulating me, So I get annoyed when they
Yeah.
start to put too much faith in what I have to say. I'm like, what the fuck who am I?
Yeah.
You know how screwed up my life is? Yeah. You know, but I think that's I don't know why I have such an not I shouldn't anxiety is too strong a word, but concern about becoming a parody of myself.
It should be everybody's chief concern because I would have it. Again, one of my great teachers, his father Dylan, he would look at his friends having, been shipped over to Rome for all that, uh,
Yeah.
those bells and whistles and rejecting it. He always, when he would tell it, and it was such a sad way, his friends who had zero common sense, who lacked the common sense to shake their followings,
Yeah.
and
You
this
know
is
who's
the
really good
thing.
on this is Carl Jung, where he says, and he calls it persona, right? Identifying with the persona, your
Mhm.
mask, right? And I try not to do that, and it's hard not to do that. But he said the problem with the persona is, that the professor identifies with his book, or the opera singer with his voice, right? Or the this or that identifies with, and I think you could point to Paul Kingsnorth or anybody who gets kind of famous even on a small scale, that they identify with their persona. And but
Rod
but
Dreher.
but yeah, but what Jung says, and this I think
Yeah,
points to all those guys. But the problem with the persona is it's usually rewarded in cash.
yeah.
I think it's a fact of. I think that's a kind of fact of life and of modern life is the persona gets rewarded in cash.
I think that's a good reductionism, because we need some good ones. That does a fair share of load carrying in when people are, and then, but that would influence. So I totally agree. But that starts, and I mean, I
Which is why,
totally agree.
which is
But
why
it
I
it,
haven't
it
been.
leads to a completely different politics, right? It's a
Yeah.
peace and justice, love politics, which we endorse, you know.
Yeah, I have yet to be rewarded with cash though, so far so good.
Right, right, right.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I mean,
No,
I think there's something to that, and especially in this internet age where it's so easy to turn oneself into a product,
mhm.
right?
And do you think like when you think of Hollywood, we do
Uh-huh.
see these people who seem to be hanging in there or find themselves, who's in your pantheon of people in different ways, even authors, who aren't creatures of their last book. uh, Pulitzer Prize winners, people
Oh,
Illich talks about these people. He thought the guy from, say, Stand and Deliver was kind of sui generis. That the guy that the movie was based on really he was doing the right thing, and again, you and I both have heroes out there who withstand
yeah.
this stuff.
I don't know. I think even like Terrence Malick, right?
Uh-huh.
I have a lot of respect for him, but I think you know, sometimes I think sometimes he makes a Terrence Malick movie.
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
You know what I mean?
It makes me
Um,
think that like this is another area where, and in real time, I'm trying to kind of foresee it. Again, I think the nation state's kind of expiration date has been stamped on it. So I try to retrain. All of a sudden, again, people started identifying with their Catholicism, which at that time could be quite regional. When the Roman Empire just kind of vanished, you still had thugs doing things, and some of the structures just kind of vanished. They ceased meeting, and this is one way of looking at the decline of the Roman Empire, which wasn't all that bad. What happened to the rich people? The poor killed them and took their food. Um, but I wonder if this idea of people taking cash and being raised to a level, because there's occasional people who kind of have this ability to withstand it. Again, Illich would never take tenure at a university, but he would take part-time assignments. He was worried to get, he would talk about milking the sacred cow. And like, what is
uh-huh.
his relationship with the sacred cow?
Oh
And that's a
yeah.
good metaphor. But I think, regionalism, when we start doing politics and things much more locally again, and again, if you ask people, and nobody, because we're so fearful of world government, as well we should be, but now they talk about like Oh, these systems that develop from the ground up, like slime molds, convergent systems, or Stephen Clark is great on the underworld. We're learning the underworld used to be seen as total chaos. No, there's order in chaos. We're entering an era. These are some of the songs I sing of the divine feminine darkness. And there's
Mhm.
principles of order that come from the bottom up. There's principles of structure that recognize
Right.
local culture and things like this. We got to harness those. But I think these problems of which you speak, and you speak about them clearly, would say, don't put your trust in princes for me, because if I think him through any other way, and we need to start developing, these regional cultures again, as and telling truth as we see it.
Yeah, and I mentioned colleges and universities which are basically hotbeds of persona, right? It
Yeah,
really
but
is.
they're failing in real time. They're kicking and screaming. I mean, they're all crashing and burning so fast, or no?
That's yeah, it's just what it is. I mean, it breeds that. You
I
know what
don't
I
think the
mean?
people who work in them take them seriously anymore, do they?
Oh, they certainly do.
Okay, I'm way out to lunch. I have no idea.
Well, some people don't, but the people
I
who,
think you're just bringing bread. I thought you were just bringing
no, I
food
think there are
home and
lots
kind
of
of hope.
people in there who are just all in,
Uh,
and what they do is they adopt whatever the current academic fashion is, whether it's feminism or gender or whatever it happens to be. They speak that language, they learn to speak that language as a way to go along, and they don't realize that what they're maybe they do realize, but I think what they because what's important to them is their career, not the truth.
and again, I kind of get that. It's not my way, but yeah, okay. So, but then they still in the that part of their brain, they still kind of know that these institutions are they've run off the cliff. No, they
No, I
don't.
don't
Okay,
think that. I think
okay, you're
most
right.
of
I
them
I
don't. I
definitely
think most of
defer
them
to you.
don't.
Yeah. Mhm.
Most of them don't. Or at least they can't admit it to themselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I put so much time and effort into this. I went, did graduate school, all this tenure, I wrote 5 books, you know, and I think you see the same thing with people who and this is whether they're going all in on Trump derangement syndrome or going all in on how great the vaccines are, right?
Mhm.
Is I don't care what you tell them or what evidence you provide them with that shows them they might have made a misjudgment earlier. They're never going to do it. And I think with the vaccine thing, for instance, say you were all pushing for it, and
Mhm.
you're saying no, people don't get sick from this or get myocarditis or anything, right? Well, the thing is,
Color within the YouTube lines. We got our two strikes, but
the thing is, if you encourage people to do those things,
yeah.
and you're not and all of a sudden the evidence shows up that maybe you were wrong,
Mhm.
it's hard to admit that
It
you did
is. It
that.
is. It is. It
And
is. It
especially
is.
that hard to admit that you may have done something that was harmful to your children.
Mhm.
So you're just going to people, and they do this, and I think part of the problem with algorithms and social media as it is right now is they get reinforced in their bias, and they find security in that because they're like the guys in Plato's cave, chained, staring at the wall, right?
Mhm.
And they don't want to be free. Or as Plotinus says, people like to be enchanted. People don't want to be free. They just don't, Mike.
There's and Namer, I disagree, but it would be I think we're even in the last couple weeks and months, we're in kind of yet new territory, meaning um that like burn your maps. And I'm not saying you and I are working from different maps, but uh so the people at universities, I'm thinking out loud. I'm buying it. And you're right. I told you the philosophy club asked me to do a thing on the Charlie Kirk assassination some weeks ago because they didn't really have an angle on it. So I said, sure, just give me a title. And it was kind of, I mentioned this. Do you have to be a Republican or Democrat to be Catholic? But I kind of sang my song, and it's some of the stuff I share here. And I was mad with Vance and like some early reactions, certainly. But anyhow, there was a psychology professor who's a good guy, and I respect him. He's there as an anti-war witness with signs most weekends. He obviously doesn't like Trump, but he liked a lot of what I was saying. But at a certain point, he just couldn't handle it. He just couldn't handle it. He doesn't on his maps. He's never going to burn those maps. But
No,
but
there's too much
the,
investment. Yeah.
yeah, but it's so the, I'd still say those maps, even though young kids like enrollment increased a little bit this year. There's still I want to go back and you tell me, but like there's still just there any young boy who goes through them is not listening if their teacher talks that way. So they've been reduced in our lifetime, let's say over 10 years, and we're talking about epochs here. But even when my kids started going to St. Bonaventure more than 12 years ago, they they still, I could say there's two things going on here. A piece of paper, which you're choosing, you want to, play this game, spend this much to hopefully get this much. With piece of paper, there's an education, but you're going to have to keep those two separate. Sometime they'll overlap, that you can have a teacher who is good and smart, or smart and you need that class. And now there's a huge cadre of young men, especially entering as freshmen, who just, as soon as they hear anything, they're just checking out and they're only there for a piece of paper. They're pushing back a little bit, but they're offline. And that's quite an evolution that I'm still going back to the case that these
Well,
universities are falling in real time.
oh yeah. Well, the academy for a while now has been hostile to men and to masculinity,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so, and I think just culturally, when you saw a lot of those younger guys like that vote for Trump in droves, and I think the reason being because they have had people telling them they're toxic masculinity and they're they're the problem. They're the reason there was slavery. All the sins of the world are upon their shoulders because they're men or
Hmm.
they're white men and they're 18 or 19, right? And they finally had an example of saying, maybe that's not the case. And they're like, thank God. Because what the hell did we do to those kids for the last 15 years or so?
Hmm.
Right? And I've noticed it when before I stopped teaching, I had fewer and fewer boys in the classes.
Yeah.
It was all girls and fewer boys, and it's not a welcoming environment to them, at least in the humanities.
Right. But even in the last couple of weeks, and not to bring it into current events, but the young men they're so dividing so quickly on that issue of even supporting Trump, right? Over things about the assassination, things about Israel, Gaza. We could go deep in that direction or not, but I think the course of events is making us burn our maps from even 3 months ago.
I I hope.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of well, the thing is with academia, they're gonna hold that line until the whole thing blows up. And then when it blows up, they're gonna blame somebody else. It wasn't their fault. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, well, it's not me. I was doing the right thing this whole time. I was speaking truth to power when actually academia speaks speaks power to truth on a regular basis.
No, it does. And what does it look like when it blows up? And again, we'll stay here for a little
Well,
bit, but what does
and
that?
they still won't be able to admit that they got it wrong. They really will be like those Japanese soldiers they found in the jungle 20 years after the war ended.
Uh-huh.
It's not over yet, right? They really, I'm not kidding. It's not
Right,
an
right, right.
exaggeration.
Uh-huh. I just think it's blowing up in real time. Yeah.
It
It's
is,
happening so
and they're going to
fast.
die, and it's not going to be their fault,
Yeah, I agree.
right?
I
It's
agree.
not. It's everybody else's fault.
Yeah.
It's the racist Donald, MAGA Republicans, not anybody else's fault. It's not that you drove. I mean, I like what English departments, which I know intimately English, um, which drove men away.
Uh-huh.
Boys would come in, they really like books and stuff, and they come in, they're like, fuck this. I'm not sticking around to have people tell me how rotten I am just because I'm a boy. I'm
Mhm.
out, I'll go do something else. I'll quit. I'll learn a trade. And and that's okay. And most English departments are more and more, they're either mostly female or mostly female and feminized men, and rarely do you have, you know, like a, you know, I mean, I saw this video the other day, guy talking about literature and why young men don't read.
Mhm.
And then he pointed to the 20th century, these writers like Hemingway and Faulkner, and who else did he mention? He might have mentioned Cormac McCarthy. Um, Fitzgerald, I know he mentioned. But he points out, he goes, now look at those, or you could even say John Steinbeck, right? Those are real, they were masculine men who loved literature, right? And which is weird because if you go back to the Renaissance, right? The idea of the Renaissance man was somebody who was not only good with arms and horsemanship and battle, but also could write poetry and sing, right? We don't have that. We've kind of there's a weird disconnect
Yeah.
where we love to hear where's Ivan Illich when you need him. I love to talk to Ivan Illich about this, right?
Yeah.
Where
And he would talk about like
literature has
learning
been
webs, right?
it's a feminized discipline right now, literature,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And which is you know foreign to me, but you can see the history of I mean, so much of the great literature written by men. I think is another great example, which he was not listed in that list of masculine men who write, is Gary Snyder, the great beat poet.
Hmm. Sure. He
Boy,
was
is he
friends with
good.
Wendell Berry. Yeah.
Yeah, Wendell Berry is another one, right? So
Yeah.
these are real solid dudes,
Hmm.
but they that they love literature and they love being dudes, whatever
And we
that
were
means.
talking about Robert Bly, you know,
Yeah.
I'm listening and I still feel like a disconnect, just that like when I look at you, I'm thinking of, the doer Mike Martin, who is for me still giving like universities more credit than any of these young guys going there is giving, the mental energy. And that like that list, all of a sudden when you read that list, like my son Aiden, and I think Peter too. No, his Peter's in a reading group and they read, I think, Grapes of Wrath, and then Aiden read it. And they saw what you're saying. But you're uniquely just like, every podcast star has like a book discussion. Without somebody like those authors, people are reading kind of a false masculinity, right? They're listening to um, podcasters. Who's our favorite? Andrew Tate or something. I try not to use
Oh, yeah,
names that
yeah, he's a caricature. He
okay. I
does
was
say
going to say I
things that
don't
are
mean him as
smart
a
upon
person.
occasion,
Right. But
you know?
or they're listening to history, people who describe war, and right now it's Marshall Mead or no, Martyr Made. He's a good historian, but he's doing um, something on World War II, and Aiden's telling me, Dad, just get Guido to do even. There's one he did with and we could do it easily, Michael. But that the Kelly, it's a pretty good website, has like Red Ice Radio.
Mhm.
Guido did a long interview on just his book Conjuring Hitler. We could have Aiden on who could ask him all the questions. I edited Guido's shortened version on it, but all these young men are interested in Hitler studies in an interesting way. Let them. They're starting to think for themselves.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go through this period of uncertainty. Like we're worried that they're going to question, official numbers and things. But I say we got to go through this pain. They're interested in truth. But Guido would have a different telling again on World War II because he's just saying cui bono. Who are the
Mhm.
powers that profited? And now is his moment. But you doing like an online book discussion on Gary Schneider or something. We need different forms of masculinity that aren't these, so we can avoid Andrew Tate. Let's not just go watch girls on OnlyFans, but then even with some good historians, I guess the ones who go on Tucker, Daryl Cooper, these are good guys, and they've earned their right to talk about martial history and history
Mhm.
of conspiracies and who killed who where. I like
Mhm.
it, but we need a masculine voice in there doing what you're saying because it was that very last part that I felt a real resonance with you know uh you know, you've heard me say, even with our good friends who've come on the podcast, the esoteric is now exoteric, and the
Hmm.
exoteric, we all know all the grades of alchemy. We know this, but none of us know how to talk to a girl, right? And so it's the,
And that's the other part of it. That's like,
yeah,
so, and I think what you see, um, we're in an age of polarities, right? Everybody throws
yeah,
all their, they go to one side,
yeah,
and if you go back to the, the Renaissance man, right? You
yeah,
better believe, better be able to write a love sonnet,
yeah,
right? Right?
yeah,
As well as kill a guy. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
Or start a fire, or split wood or something, right?
yeah. I think like you were born, it's not to say like every wheelhouse isn't your own. But for me at this time, when I talk about like young men, it's my years in campus ministry. Like I've done so many different jobs for the diocese. I'm on a distinct role now, but I'm just one of those people. Ask me who I am. I'm a campus minister, and the kind of the young male who is interested, and they're they're listening kind of to history right now, and they're not reading, they're listening to podcasts. But I still think this idea of like people who, but and they're interested in learning how to fix things and bend metal. But a humanities take on masculinity is a world into itself for me.
Yeah.
This over course correction on fake notions of masculinity, and just again how to talk to a girl.
Well,
What do girls think? Every
and
young
that's
girl
what
you talk to, and I talk to a lot, every guy will come and tell them how to be Catholic. They're going to question the girls on their Catholicism. And they're going to tell them what they know, and they're going to tell them there's no Catholic guy who takes a Catholic girl out on a date who doesn't tell her how to be Catholic. And there's not one who asks them like how they think or what interests them,
hmm
or who can have conversation, the versa in there, the going between. It's interfacing, which Illich warned us about.
and I think the problem is, and this is how, if you push the anti male rhetoric that we had pushed for 25, 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just obvious that you're gonna create the opposite. You're gonna create Andrew Tate just by
It's
doing that.
true. It's true.
And so
I just
there
don't like these guys. They seem
but
so
there- but
shallow.
there's no
Yeah.
balance. I mean, I don't like the other way, the other direction. Actually, Robert
Yeah.
Bly, he called them soft males. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, like what's what's that guy's name?
I
Henry.
think they're fading in real life, don't you? They're still there at CNN and NBC. The soft
Ooh.
male thing. The
Oh, yeah,
soft
soft
male.
males are all over the place. Yeah.
I know, but they're fading a little bit. Like their cultural moment has already shifted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hope so.
I think
But
it
the other
has.
thing, you gotta, and I hate, we just need balance. But I think you need, this is when I would talk to I was teaching those girls in that course on romanticism, and I said, "Do your boyfriends write your poetry or anything? What's going on?" And they're like, "My boyfriend."
They're quoting the catechism
Well, here's the
and like
thing
the
is
fourth
that,
assassination of some obscure emperor
I
in
mean,
Rome. Yeah.
let's talk a
Fourth
principle. So a
assassination
nice
attempt.
principle would be, is of course I'm describing myself, right? The ideal masculine balance would be somebody who can write a really good poem and gut a deer, right?
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think it's right. Yeah, it's a good.
but
It's a good.
often you don't get that. I mean, you go to a graduate program in creative writing, most of those guys aren't gutting deer. Oh, you know who's another great masculine writer, and is Jim Harrison.
Yeah.
And he's a great
Actually,
writer too. Boy, is that he is.
tell me about Jim Harrison. I don't think I know him.
You don't know him.
Tell me more about him. I
Oh,
might.
Jim Harrison he was kind of being marketed as the new Hemingway. He's probably of my parents' generation. I think he
Okay.
may be alive. Do I have his book? Yes, I do.
He was your parents' generation?
Yeah.
So give me his
He
big
wrote-
title.
Well, he wrote a bunch of stuff. He wrote not just poetry, and he wrote Legends of the Fall, for instance.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But he also wrote essays. He was a gourmand, and he wrote essays on food and cooking and hunting, which are also super good. Let me see if I can get a good one in here.
So Crocodile Hunter was intriguing to this generation, right?
Oh, here's I just
It's
opened
fairly
this up
male.
random. What poem is this?
I'd never heard of Jim Harrison.
Oh, he's great. He actually he was from Traverse City around that area.
Were you saying he was a poser or he kind of did the
Oh
real
no, he
thing?
was
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
really he could gut a deer and he could write
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Here's an example. This is just from this poem, which it's called A Year's Changes. It's a longer poem. I'll just read this one little section.
Sure.
The doe shot in the back and just below the shoulder has her heart and lungs blown out. In the last crazy seconds, she leaves a circle of blood on the snow. An hour later, we eat her still warm liver for lunch, fried in butter with onions. In the evening, we roast her loins and drink 2 gallons of wine, reeling drunken and yelling on the snow. John Jackson will eat venison for a month. He has no job, food, or money, and his pump and well are frozen.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah. And he was speaking. Yeah. There's people like that. He was
yeah,
just
and
hardcore.
he's really in touch with it, but his
Yeah.
he can also be
Good.
super funny.
Yeah.
His writing on hunting and food is very often hilarious,
Yeah. Did you
about
ever used
cooking.
to read Joe Bagent, who died? Like, our friend Carol Johnston was on. He
I
wrote from
don't,
like West Virginia, deer hunting with Jesus. He was just that kind of like he survived in Appalachia, that kind of old blue collar Democrat who just didn't
Mhm.
he called a spade about
But
politics and everything. Yeah.
and that's the weird thing, right? When
He was
we talk
good,
about
man. Yeah, he was a
Democrats,
dude. He was a dude. Yeah.
so I mean, I grew up, I don't think there was a Republican in my church or
Yeah.
neighborhood,
Mhm.
but we were all blue collar Democrats who really weren't interested in politics. And if you look at the Democratic Party now, and I think the criticism that it's now the party of the elite and the educated classes and the laptop class, I mean, that's a legit criticism. It might be oversimplified, but I think it's legitimate.
Sure.
It's certainly, and I think part of the reason so many people left the Democratic Party and voted for Donald Trump, it was mostly those blue collar people, the forgotten men, we could call them.
I think every time we leave one, you're saying the exact truth about the Democrats. We're always running from like the frying pan into the fire.
But they didn't used to be
They
like
just
that.
receive us in the new place and just beat us up more. Like
They
right now,
certainly,
like the people who kind of liked some aspects of the first administration are just getting thrown into the fire, it seems to me.
and I think what happened to Democrats, they started to change around what happened is when Bill Clinton sold out the working class to NAFTA. That's when he started to lose them. And then when Barack Obama was elected, it was really the party of bankers and professors,
Right.
and other kinds of people like professionals like that, and not and the people those actually, if you look to the 2016 election, what did Hillary Clinton call them? And I when she did this, and
Deplorable, sure.
I did not vote that. I refused to vote for either party at that
Yeah.
time. But when she called anybody interested in voting for Donald Trump a basket of deplorables, I knew
Really
she was
bad.
going to lose at that moment.
Yeah. Oops. I just turned
Where'd you
my
go?
I'm back. 1 second here. Oh, you know what I
Mike,
did?
Mike pulled the
There I
plug.
am. You can hear me though, right?
Uh,
Yeah,
yes, sir.
but I would say that same part of what used to be the MAGA coalition, that's what I'm saying. 3 weeks ago, they were kind of there, no longer so. No longer so. I'm saying we're living in real times now. That they thought they see what's happening and they say, wow, the guy didn't really represent us. You know
Well, you
that
know what?
at
I
least
don't
it's a
know.
very open question right now. That
Well, with
there seems
that,
to be a complete betrayal with like regime change and some of these things that people are just calling a
yeah, I
complete.
hope. I mean, what I have learned with
Yeah.
Donald Trump is to not jump to conclusions because
Uh-huh.
for me, it's always waiting to see where it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But sometimes I go, well, that was fucked up, and then, well, that was actually ended up being a good idea. Hey,
I'm actually not hitting anything, people that I do
Mike, you pulled your plug again.
cannot start video, failed to start. So what we'll do is select another video in settings. I can do that. Folks, I have a couple of videos I could probably choose.
We're
Um,
experiencing technical
I could
difficulties.
go over here maybe.
No, it was the Democrats who just pulled the plug on Mike.
You and I see that one differently. I just think too
Yeah.
much has been happening in the last couple of weeks that, or again, it's
Well,
just,
that's the
you know,
thing. There is so much happening right now.
again, we can track it. You and I don't
It's
claim to want to
it's
talk about
mind
like the,
spinning, and I that's
it's
why
mind spinning. It's
I
mind spinning.
that's why I reserve judgment, at least
Yep,
in
yep,
the short term, because I don't know what the hell is going on.
yep. And
Yeah.
again, for me, bubbling cauldron, bubbling cauldron. That's why I said Philip Balboni. He
But
was good, you know.
as I said before, I think it's not going to settle down until the beginning of next year when those outer planets start to settle into their new
I
signs.
don't think that's a bad way of looking at it, you know, because there, again, these divisions that are happening, why create lifelong enemies? That's a worry of this, you know, for something that might start sorting itself out in real time. Like, hold
Right.
our cards. I would only talk about anything, you know, that I think, you know, I'll never speak at this time saying I know this. I just had conversations, you know, with people within the church of where I think things are at right now, but I always like you, and I think it's a good practice. Like, let's be honest, none of us really knows what's going on.
No.
You know, it's
Yeah.
hard.
I mean,
I start to like question lots of things, and I'll name them if asked. But
yeah, and
you know,
there are some things I know. Like I know
uh,
academia, right?
yeah, right,
I can talk
yeah,
about that because
yeah,
I'm not it's not theoretical.
right.
Right.
Hmm.
I have practical experience in that realm.
Yeah. So, what are you doing this week?
And settling down. I mean,
That's good.
I was so slammed with editing jobs, but they finally slowed down, and I
Okay.
still have work, but
What are you reading lately? You know.
I have been reading Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut
Okay.
because I needed to read. It's not as funny as I remembered it being, but I'm reading that just because I needed something out of my comfort zone to read.
Hmm.
I don't think I read it. I've read it since I was 18 or 19.
Gotcha.
But I happened to pick up a copy was it a used bookstore where they're giving out books for free kind of thing.
Okay.
So that and then I got to get ready to start writing this essay for that conference in the Czech Republic for next summer because
Yeah, that'll be funny.
they want it and that's going to be I think somehow about eschatology and sophiology.
Our Lady Clothed with the Sun. You know, that
Yeah.
seems to be Bulgakov's jam, right? Get some good synopses, read again, The Bride of
And
the Lamb,
Solovyov's, right?
and Soloviev for sure.
But
Yeah,
I think who's going to probably play a major role in that essay is going to be Berjayev
interesting.
because
What jumps to you there? We both
well,
kind of
because
know the
I
corpus
think
pretty
even
well.
more than Soloviev,
Hmm.
Berjayev was a prophet. You know, he could see the wheels like when he was looking at he looked at the church's role in the world and he called the church on not living up to its mandate,
Hmm.
right? East and west.
Hmm.
And he was scathing in his criticism, right? And I think uh and he also one place he writes that I know that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, but it sure looks like they're prevailing,
Yeah,
right?
but then what does he say? You know, like again, Soloviev would tell the short history of the Antichrist. You know, I tend to, does Berdiev, when he talks about maybe the new Middle Ages, is that kind of what you're thinking of? Sophiology is found in that?
Well, that's the antidote, right?
Yeah,
To the eschaton for him
yeah,
and
yeah.
for Florensky is the new Middle
Uh-huh.
Ages, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And they both sense that coming, but there's another part of Berjayev that senses the eschaton coming and the
yeah,
collapse of the church and the political order.
yeah. It's funny
Reign
when I think
reign
about
of
it,
evil.
like, you know, Martin Shaw, when I saw an interview, when he was on with us last, I think it was him, or maybe I saw him in another one. He was talking about, you know, he's still that guy is not Kingsnorth. Let me tell you, like the
Oh
guy's
no, he's not.
authentic. No, no, no. He when he flies from Europe over to America, and I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth, and we'll have him on again. You know, I'd like to review his book and have him on. But he when he flies to America, he knows the future's there. So again, you're a grown up, I'm a grown up. You don't hear me telling you what to do. But when I think about it in a European context, what I would say if I were you seems to me to be quite different. Like last week, I started speaking about Our Lady of Guadalupe. Something about eschatology when I think of Our Lady of Guadalupe is very different than when I think of European
Oh
Christianity.
yeah.
Like when I think of a Mary figure flying down on the suns, you know, that Daniel Andreev, the Rose of the World, that was kind of interesting, right? It was almost like you know how the kingdom of God is here with us? The rose of the world with Daniel Andreev, he did have it descending, and they called him the Russian Dante. But it almost, you could see it opening almost like a kingdom within. Imagine if there was like a mystical rose that
Uh-huh.
started opening within the world right now, and we raised levels of perception, and then we start to see it. Then we just have to step into it. And I think she's going to lead to smaller political entities. She's going to lead to a relationship with the land that harnesses what from technology should be saved. Illich kind of gave us some guidelines. Medicine is going to be saved through a higher blend of what we've learned through these years of institutionalization, as well as natural medicine.
Right.
Does Berdyaev kind of go into any granular level? Because I remember reading him on that, and I agree with you. He was very seminal to my thinking.
Um,
Because for Iran trans, they're just going to think about buying pipe tobacco and trying to like save up something to make a shire,
mhm.
which is cool.
Well, I think there is an element of pessimism to what he has to say about it,
Okay. Mhm.
because when he look, and this is like he was writing 100 years ago almost, right? Looking at the condition of Europe at that time and the rise of German nationalism and stuff like that, right?
Sure.
And so he was there, there's that, but for him,
That's a good
the real
context.
tragedy is the tragedy of the church. That's the real church because the
Yeah.
church has not been the
Yeah.
church.
Mhm.
And
That's another institution that's collapsing in real time,
it
at
is.
least in this iteration. But it's one in many. It's like saying, "Wow, my even my marigolds are kind of dying right now, but they live and their seeds.
But even,
They live. They live. They live." Yeah. Yeah.
what's his name? Slavoj Žižek. I can't remember which
Yeah.
one it is.
Yeah.
But he says, it is time that, maybe it is time that Christianity, like its founder, has to die in order to find new life.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
You
Too
know?
bad that guy says really genius things sometimes. Otherwise, I just wouldn't read him because I just find him annoying. But
I know, but I
yeah,
think he's funny. That's why.
yeah,
But he is. Well, I like what I like about him is that he doesn't act like an academic,
no,
you know,
no,
and he's dead funny.
no. Well, this is good. This is good.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea again, Philip. I've been chatting with him. He might kind of hop on. I don't even know my schedule for next week. I know, a family gathering one of the 2 days. But
Okay.
and before we sign off, I'll even say this in front of our audience. Would you be so kind as to maybe send me like a title we'd use for this one?
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes they just don't come to me, and you've got a better memory of the things we talked about. And then,
Yeah. Don't,
wonderful,
don't lay
beautiful
that
day
on me.
here. That's big. Every so often, mine are just so factual. And again, let me tell for those people who are staying with us to the end, I think I can, like Scott, there used to be something, and I've just gotten busy this fall where I'd have to, you upload one, you get something, and you'd have to change it from MP4 to MP3, put it on MP3, put the outros and intros on, and again, and then I would balance things out. There was a time where I was just getting the garden in, a lot of things were going. We started having grandchildren, where I was just getting the basic thing up there, and I just saw us as just like a garage band, but I did. It's not a bad characterization, the production values.
No,
But MP3, not converting it to MP3 because our hoster that sends it out to others, it's called Podbean. MP3, so I'm sorry, Spotify just takes it on MP3. So I think I can start doing that at least, and add the intros and outros when I can. We're still the same podcast, but whoever heard of a garage band getting more garage over time?
that's right.
Yeah, just really, really rugged. We just start talking. It's always worth it though, brother.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration podcast. We'll see you next week, same time, same place.
Yeah.
All right. See you, brother.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.
God bless.